She was forced to marry a disabled billionaire to save her family from crushing debt. Everyone believed her life would become a nightmare, trapped in a loveless marriage with a cold, distant man confined to a wheelchair. But on the night of their wedding, something unexpected happened. The man she thought would never walk again suddenly stood up. And in that moment, she realized her marriage was built on secrets far deeper than she could ever imagine. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives forever. The rain poured heavily that evening, soaking the narrow streets of the small neighborhood where Aisha lived. Under a broken umbrella, she hurried home after finishing another long day of work. Her clothes were slightly damp, and her feet ached from standing for hours, but none of that mattered to her. All she could think about was her father. As soon as she entered the modest house, she saw him lying weakly on the old sofa, his breathing uneven. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked softly, rushing to his side. Her father forced a faint smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little tired." But Aisha knew the truth. The hospital bills were piling up. The medicines were expensive, and the small salary she earned was nowhere near enough to cover everything. She had already sold most of their belongings. Her mother's jewelry, the television, even her own personal savings. Still, it wasn't enough. That night, after her father fell asleep, Aisha sat alone at the dining table, staring at the stack of unpaid bills in front of her. Her chest felt tight. She didn't know how much longer she could keep fighting like this, but giving up was never an option, because her father was the only family she had left in this world. Little did she know, a decision she would soon make would change her life forever. The next morning, Aisha arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. She had barely slept the night before, her mind overwhelmed with worry about the unpaid bills and her father's worsening condition. As she walked through the hospital corridor, her phone suddenly rang. It was an unknown number. For a moment she hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A calm, professional female voice spoke on the other end. "Is this Miss Aisha Rahman?" "Yes, this is she. I would like to meet you. It's regarding your father's medical expenses." Aisha's heart skipped a beat. "How do you know about my father?" "You'll understand when we meet," the woman replied politely. "I'll send you the address." Before Aisha could ask more questions, the call ended. Confused and slightly nervous, she stared at her phone. A few seconds later, a message arrived. An address in one of the most luxurious districts in the city. That afternoon, curiosity and desperation led her there. When she arrived, she froze in front of a massive mansion with tall iron gates and perfectly manicured gardens. This place looked like something out of a movie. A uniformed guard opened the gate after confirming her name. Inside, she was escorted into an elegant living room decorated with expensive furniture and crystal chandeliers. Moments later, a graceful middle-aged woman entered. Her posture was refined, her expression calm but authoritative. "Miss Aisha," the woman said gently, sitting across from her. "My name is Mrs. Farah. I know about your situation, and I want to help you." Aisha felt both hope and confusion. "Why would you help me?" Mrs. Farah looked directly into her eyes. "Because I need something from you in return." A brief silence filled the room. Then the woman continued, "I want you to marry my son." Aisha's eyes widened in shock. She thought she had misheard. "Marry your son?" Mrs. Farah nodded slowly. "My son is a good man, but he is disabled. He has been confined to a wheelchair since an accident 2 years ago." The words hit Aisha like thunder. "And if you agree," Mrs. Farah added calmly, "I will pay all your father's medical expenses and give your family financial security for the rest of your life." The room suddenly felt smaller. Heavier, Aisha's hands trembled slightly. She had come hoping for help, but she never expected an offer that would change her entire future. That night, Aisha sat quietly beside her father's hospital bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest as he slept. The rhythmic sound of the heart monitor echoed softly in the dim room. Her mind, however, was anything but calm. Mrs. Farah's words kept repeating in her head. "I will pay all your father's medical expenses and give your family financial security for the rest of your life." In exchange, she only had to do one thing: marry a man she had never met. A disabled man, a stranger. Aisha lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket. Marriage was supposed to be about love, trust, companionship, not a transaction, not a sacrifice. But when she looked at her father's pale face, all those ideals began to feel distant and fragile. He had already sacrificed everything for her. Now, it was her turn. The next morning, the doctor called her into his office. His expression was serious. "Miss Aisha, your father needs surgery as soon as possible. Without it, his condition may become life-threatening." Her heart dropped. "How much will it cost?" she asked quietly. The number he mentioned made her vision blur. It was impossible, completely impossible. No matter how hard she worked, she would never be able to afford it in time. That was the moment she realized. She didn't really have a choice. Later that afternoon, with trembling hands, she dialed the number Mrs. Farah had given her. The call connected almost immediately. "Yes, Miss Aisha?" the elegant voice answered. Aisha closed her eyes for a brief second, gathering the last bit of courage she had. "I accept," she said softly. There was a short pause. Then Mrs. Farah replied, calm and satisfied. "Good. The wedding will be arranged soon." When the call ended, Aisha slowly lowered the phone. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She had just agreed to marry a man she had never met. And from that moment on, her life would never belong entirely to her again. 2 days later, Aisha stood nervously in front of the same grand mansion. This time, she wasn't there as a guest. She was there as the future daughter-in-law. Her hands felt cold despite the warm afternoon air. She adjusted her hijab slightly, trying to calm the anxious pounding in her chest. A house assistant opened the door and guided her inside. Mrs. Farah greeted her with a gentle smile. "Thank you for coming, Aisha. My son is upstairs. I think it's time you meet him." The words made her stomach tighten. This was it, the moment that would determine the rest of her life. They walked through a long hallway before stopping in front of a large wooden door. Mrs. Farah knocked once, then opened it. Inside the room, sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a spacious bedroom filled with modern furniture. Near the window sat a man in a wheelchair. His back was facing them at first. Then slowly, he turned around. Aisha felt her breath catch. He was younger than she expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features and deep, intense eyes. If not for the wheelchair, he would have looked like someone straight out of a luxury magazine. But his expression was cold, unreadable. "This is Aisha," Mrs. Farah said calmly. She agreed to the marriage. The man's gaze moved toward her. It was piercing, almost intimidating. "So," he said flatly, his voice low and controlled, "you're the woman who agreed to marry me for money." The bluntness of his words made Aisha freeze. She lowered her eyes, feeling embarrassed, exposed. Let me make something clear," he continued, cutting her off. "I don't believe in love. I don't need sympathy. And I definitely don't need someone pretending to care about me." The room suddenly felt colder. "If you're doing this for the money," he added, "then don't expect anything from me." Aisha's fingers tightened slightly, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I understand," she said softly. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise. Perhaps he hadn't expected her to accept his harsh words so easily. After a short silence, he spoke again. "My name is Adrian." Aisha nodded politely. "I'm Aisha." Neither of them smiled. Neither of them moved closer. But in that quiet room, an invisible thread of fate had already begun tying their lives together, and neither of them realized how complicated that connection would soon become. The wedding day arrived with all the grandeur one could imagine. The mansion's ballroom was decorated with cascading flowers, sparkling chandeliers, and golden accents that reflected the afternoon sunlight. Guests whispered in admiration as they watched Aisha, dressed in an elegant white gown and delicate hijab, step gracefully down the aisle. But despite the beauty around her, Aisha felt a cold emptiness in her chest. She glanced toward Adrian, sitting in his wheelchair at the front. His face remained unreadable, his eyes distant. There was no warmth, no welcoming smile. As the ceremony began, the officiant spoke words of unity and commitment. But Aisha's mind wandered. She remembered the reason she was here: her father's life, her family's survival. This marriage was never about love. It was a necessity. When the ceremony ended, guests clapped politely, and photographers snapped pictures. Aisha and Adrian were officially husband and wife, yet the silence between them was heavier than any crowd. During the reception, while others laughed and danced, Adrian barely spoke a word. He maintained a formal, almost cold posture, nodding politely when introduced to family and friends, but never initiating conversation. Aisha, trying her best to remain composed, quietly sat at the table. She had prepared herself for this. She knew love wouldn't be instant. But she hadn't expected the sense of isolation. The feeling that she was a guest in her own wedding. Later, as the celebration ended and the guests departed, Mrs. Farah approached Aisha. "Don't worry, Aisha," she whispered gently. "He will come around. He's complicated, but give him time." Aisha nodded, though doubt gnawed at her heart. That night, standing alone in the bedroom assigned to her, she looked at Adrian across the room. He sat silently staring out the window. Neither spoke a word. It was a marriage bound by necessity, yet the tension in the air made the silence louder than any words. Aisha realized with a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of a long, uncertain journey. The grand wedding day was over, but Aisha's heart still raced as she entered the bedroom prepared for her and Adrian. The room was luxurious, silk sheets, soft lighting, and a view overlooking the gardens. But none of it eased her nerves. She placed her small bag on the bedside table and took a deep breath. Tonight, she would face her husband alone for the first time. Adrian was already there, sitting silently in his wheelchair near the window. His back was straight, his posture rigid, and his gaze fixed outside. He didn't even glance at her as she stepped closer. Aisha swallowed hard. Good evening," she said softly, her voice trembling. Adrian finally turned his head. His piercing eyes met hers, but there was no warmth, only a cold, unreadable stare. "Good evening," he replied flatly. "I assume you know the rules." She nodded, unsure how to respond. Her hands were clammy and her chest felt tight. "The first night isn't about love," he continued, his tone almost clinical. "It's about respect, and I don't tolerate pretense." Aisha bit her lip, feeling both fear and shame. She hadn't imagined her first night would be like this, so tense, so distant. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the faint rustle of the curtains and the soft hum of the city outside. Finally, Adrian leaned back slightly, his voice low but firm. "Rest. That is all I require tonight." Aisha nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to understand him, but the words caught in her throat. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of this marriage pressing down on her. What she didn't know was that this night, which seemed so cold and ordinary, would be the night that changed everything, because by morning, nothing would be as it seemed. Aisha awoke in the quiet darkness, the room still bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. She turned slowly, expecting to see Adrian sitting silently in his wheelchair as usual, but the room was empty. Her heart began to race. "Adrian?" she whispered, her voice trembling. From the far side of the room, she heard a soft shuffle. She blinked, and her eyes widened in disbelief. Adrian was standing, not in the wheelchair, not leaning on anything. He was upright, his tall figure outlined by the moonlight. Aisha's hand flew to her mouth. How is this possible?" Adrian turned to her, his eyes calm, almost amused. "I told you I'm disabled," he said quietly, "but only to see who would stay by my side without pretending." Her mind raced. All this time, she had thought he couldn't walk. All the whispers, the rumors, the assumptions. And it had been a test. You can walk?" she stammered, unable to hide her shock. Adrian nodded. "I can. I wanted to know if the person I marry is here for me, or just my wealth and status." Aisha's chest tightened. She didn't know whether to feel relief, fear, or something else entirely. You tricked me," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't trick you," he replied calmly. "I gave you a choice, and you chose your family over hesitation. That matters more than you realize." Aisha's eyes filled with tears. The man she had feared, the cold and distant husband, was not what he seemed. In that moment, everything changed. The marriage that had felt like a cage now held the possibility of something far more complicated and far more real. For the first time, she saw the man behind the mask, and she realized her journey with him was only beginning. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold. Aisha sat on the edge of the bed, still processing what she had witnessed the previous night. Adrian, who had appeared so cold and distant, was capable of standing, walking, and perhaps even more than she could imagine. Adrian sat across from her, sipping his coffee, calm and composed as if nothing unusual had happened. "You're staring," he said without looking up. Aisha swallowed. Last night, he raised a hand, cutting her off gently. You need to understand something. My disability, it's complicated. Some people know, most don't. I have my reasons for the deception. Aisha's brow furrowed. Why? Why make me think you were completely helpless? Because I wanted to see your true character, he said softly, his gaze finally meeting hers. To see if you would stay for me, or just my wealth. Aisha felt a mixture of anger, confusion, and something she didn't want to admit. Curiosity, maybe even respect. Adrian leaned forward slightly. We need to establish boundaries. This marriage, it's not what people think. We'll live together, yes, but it's a contract. For 6 months. A contract? Aisha echoed, heart pounding. Yes, he replied firmly. You save your family, I see who you are. After 6 months, we decide. If either of us cannot continue, the marriage ends without scandal. Aisha's mind spun. This arrangement was strange, cold, and yet there was a part of her that understood. He was testing her, yes, but he was giving her the chance to choose, in his own way. She nodded slowly. I understand. Adrian's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. Good, then we begin. That day, Aisha realized that the man she married was more complex than anyone could see. And she also realized this 6-month contract was just the beginning of a story filled with secrets, challenges, and unexpected emotions that neither of them were ready for. The days that followed were a careful balance of rules, boundaries, and quiet observation. Aisha moved into the mansion fully, taking on her role as Adrian's wife while keeping her emotions in check. Every interaction was measured, every word chosen carefully. Adrian, true to his word, remained distant and controlled, observing her without showing much reaction. Yet there were moments, small, almost imperceptible moments, when his guard slipped. A slight nod of approval, a brief smile, a conversation that lingered longer than expected. Aisha noticed them, though she tried not to let her heart respond. Meals were silent affairs at first, but slowly they began talking. About small things, the weather, the gardens, a book she had brought for her father. Adrian listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just nodding thoughtfully. One evening, as Aisha arranged fresh flowers in the living room, Adrian appeared behind her. She froze, unsure of what to expect. You like flowers, he said quietly, almost as if it were a secret observation. I do, she replied softly, glancing at him. For a moment, the room was quiet except for the gentle rustle of petals. And then he said something unexpected. You're patient. You don't complain, even when things are difficult. Aisha's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time he had complimented her directly. Not sarcastically, not coldly, genuinely. She nodded, feeling both proud and nervous. I try my best. Adrian studied her silently, then turned away, standing tall and firm. That night, lying in her room, Aisha realized something frightening and exhilarating at the same time. The man she had feared, the man she thought would never show emotion, was beginning to change, and with every passing day, she felt the invisible thread between them growing stronger, pulling them toward a connection neither of them had expected. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion, once cold and silent, began to feel different. Adrian was still strict and distant in many ways, but the small gestures became more frequent. A cup of tea left on the table just the way Aisha liked it. A blanket draped over her shoulders when she studied late into the night. A glance lingered longer than necessary, Aisha noticed, and though she tried to remain composed, her heart couldn't ignore it. One evening, while walking through the mansion's garden, Adrian approached her quietly. You're good at this, he said, nodding toward the flowers she tended so carefully. I enjoy it, Aisha replied softly, a hint of nervousness in her voice. He studied her for a moment, his eyes softer than usual. You're different from what I expected. Stronger, smarter, kinder. Aisha felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She didn't know how to respond. Thank you, she said simply. Adrian nodded, his expression unreadable once more, but there was something unspoken in the quiet between them, something that made Aisha's heart beat faster. Later that night, as she lay in her room, she thought about the man she married. The man who had seemed so cold and unreachable was slowly revealing himself. And for the first time, Aisha wondered, not about her obligations, not about the contract, but about Adrian's heart. Could it be that he was beginning to feel something for her? And more dangerously, could she be beginning to feel the same? Life in the mansion was slowly finding a rhythm, but peace never lasts long in stories like theirs. One afternoon, while Aisha was arranging flowers in the garden, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the mansion. A well-dressed woman stepped out, her posture confident and eyes sharp. Adrian appeared behind Aisha, noticing the visitor immediately. His expression darkened. "Who is she?" Aisha whispered, sensing the tension in the air. "That is someone from my past," Adrian replied quietly, his jaw tight. "Someone who doesn't accept boundaries easily." The woman walked straight to the front door. "Adrian, we need to talk," she said, her voice smooth but commanding. Aisha's heart sank. She knew instantly this would be trouble. Adrian stepped forward, his tall frame towering over her. "Not here. She will not disrupt anything," he said firmly. But the woman ignored him. "You can't hide from me forever. I know the truth about us, and I won't let it go unnoticed." Aisha's mind raced. Who was she? And what truth could she possibly know? Adrian's eyes flickered with something rare: anger, frustration, and maybe a hint of fear. He turned to Aisha for a brief moment, his voice low and tense. "Stay inside. Don't get involved." But Aisha felt a mixture of curiosity and dread. She wanted to stay safe, but a part of her wanted to understand this new danger that had appeared in their lives. For the first time since their marriage, Aisha realized that being Adrian's wife meant more than living under one roof. It meant navigating secrets, rivalries, and a past that refused to stay buried. And that day, a storm had quietly entered their lives. The tension in the mansion hung heavier than ever. Adrian's past had returned, and Aisha could feel the invisible walls growing between them once more. One evening, after a brief but tense confrontation with the mysterious woman, Adrian retreated to his study. He slammed the door lightly behind him, leaving the room silent but charged with unspoken words. Aisha, standing in the hallway, felt a sinking weight in her chest. She had tried to ask questions, to understand, but Adrian's cold stare had shut her down. She realized painfully that her presence might now be complicating things rather than helping. She made a difficult decision. If her staying caused Adrian stress, or drew him into conflict with the woman from his past, perhaps stepping back was the only way to protect him. And herself. That night, she packed a small bag quietly, careful not to disturb anyone. She left a note on the bedside table. "I hope you find peace. I will always care for you, but perhaps we need time apart." By dawn, she had left the mansion, her heart heavy with sorrow and uncertainty. Adrian awoke later that morning to find the room empty, and the note. His hands trembled slightly as he read her words. For the first time in weeks, he felt an emptiness he couldn't control. He had thought Aisha's presence would be simple. But now, seeing her leave, selflessly, to protect him, something inside him shifted. And somewhere far from the mansion, Aisha walked quietly through the city streets. Tears she refused to shed earlier now streaming freely. She had given up her place in Adrian's life, at least for now. Neither of them realized that this sacrifice, born out of love and misunderstanding, was only the beginning of a chain of events that would force them back together. Adrian sat alone in his study, the mansion unusually quiet without Aisha's presence. For days, he tried to focus on work, on meetings, on anything that would distract him from the emptiness gnawing at his chest. But nothing worked. Her absence was a constant ache. Every corner of the house reminded him of her, the teacup she had left by the window, the flowers she had arranged in perfect symmetry, even the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. He realized with a clarity he could no longer ignore that he had underestimated her, that her patience, her kindness, and her quiet strength had become more important to him than he ever wanted to admit. Finally he stood. Determination flashed in his eyes. He would not let her walk away without understanding how much she meant to him. Meanwhile, Aisha was trying to continue her life. But the weight of leaving Adrian, even for his sake, pressed heavily on her heart. She missed him. The way he observed her quietly, the rare moments when he let his guard down, the small gestures that showed she mattered. Adrian's search began. He asked around quietly but urgently, following any lead that could bring him to her. Every street, every cafe, every place she might go, he would find her. And when their paths finally crossed again, it would no longer be about rules, contracts, or testing character. It would be about honesty, vulnerability, and the love they had both been too afraid to admit. The distance had changed them, but it had also revealed what truly mattered: each other. The city streets glistened with the soft light of early evening as Aisha walked slowly, lost in thought. She had almost convinced herself that the past weeks, the tests, the sacrifices, the misunderstandings were behind her. Suddenly, a familiar voice called her name. Aisha. She turned and froze. There, standing before her, was Adrian. But this time, he was not in his wheelchair. Her eyes widened in shock. He walked toward her, tall, strong, and confident, his presence undeniable. I can walk, he said softly, a small, sincere smile tugging at his lips. But it's not about that anymore. It's about us. Tears welled in Aisha's eyes as emotions she had kept buried rushed to the surface. I came to apologize for everything, for being distant, for testing you, for not showing you what I truly feel, Adrian continued, his voice filled with quiet intensity. Aisha shook her head, smiling through her tears. I left because I thought it was best, but I never stopped caring. Adrian took her hand gently. Then let's stop pretending. No contracts, no tests. Just us. He knelt slightly, taking both her hands in his. Aisha, will you marry me truly this time? Not for duty, not for obligation, but because we love each other. Aisha's heart raced. A rush of relief, joy, and love washed over her. With a soft, trembling voice, she whispered, yes. Around them, the world seemed to pause. The city lights, the evening breeze, even the distant hum of life, fading into the moment that belonged only to them. From the trials, the sacrifices, and the misunderstandings had emerged a love that was real, unshakable, and ready to begin anew. And together, they stepped forward into a future filled not with tests or secrets, but with trust, hope, and the promise of forever.